afternoon. My name is Gary Tinterow, and I'm director of the Museum of Fine Arts. It's wonderful to see so many friends and colleagues gathered here to honor Clint Willour and Reid Mitchell. As you all know better than I, Clint and the Museum of Fine Arts were inseparable. Clint made his first gift to the collection in 1976, a screen print by Thomas Downing. Soon after, he began working at, I think it was then called Tibor-Denage Gallery, ultimately Watson-Denage Gallery. 2 years later, in support of the new Department of Photography, he deepened his commitment by funding the purchase of photographs for his good friend, Ann Wilkes Tucker, who was the founding curator of that department. In a letter accompanying the check he sent to director William C. Agee, he wrote, "This is only the first of my contributions to the museum." That's music to the ears of any museum director. Over the decades that followed, Clint both donated and underwrote the acquisition of more than 1,500 works of art, a truly extraordinary number. He was a major supporter of the museum's Hirsch Library as well, giving more than 2,500 books, catalogs, and works of artists' ephemera. Most of these donations reflected his commitment to the artists he exhibited during his years at Watson-Denage, 73 to 89, and at the Galveston Art Center, 1990 to 2016. Soon after I arrived at the museum 10 years ago, I was struck by Clint's delight in helping artists by purchasing work for the museum, what we can accurately call a win-win. In fact, Clint was the first person to give a gift of a work of art to the museum in my honor, a touching gesture that I'll never forget. Clint served on many of the museum's committees, and he formed deep friendships with the curatorial staff, most famously with Ann Wilkes Tucker, who'll be sharing her reflections in a few moments. But Clint also proved to become a friend and mentor to successive generations of curators, to the artists who worked here, and to our librarians, as Jon Evans will tell you. His enthusiasm and his generosity were contagious. I won't embarrass you by calling out your names, but many in the room today have been carried away by Clint's example. Reid, too, was an important presence at the museum, reliably at Clint's side, a partnership and marriage, ultimately, that stood as a sterling example to anyone paying attention, straight or gay. Reid's devotion to Clint during his life-threatening illness a few years ago was truly outstanding. They took particular pleasure in dressing for each occasion, and I see that the podium has been festooned with their famous Hawaiian shirts. Most important, they not only showed up at the museum, they participated. That engagement is what we strive for at the museum. Clint and Reid made our work worthwhile. Sorry. Others will speak to Clint and Reid's wide-ranging impact across the region, and I hope that that impact will reverberate for decades to come. In their absence, excuse me, it falls upon us to retell their stories and to hold their examples to future generations. Thank you.
Well, my goodness, here we are. This is, I thought I was ready for this. I've been practicing, I have a script, but this is pretty overwhelming, I might say. I see old friends that I haven't seen for a long time. And there are occasions I've had in the past where Clint, of course, could get up and see an audience like this and just take off, fly, wing it. He was great. He didn't have to worry about being nervous or anything. And he would see me get up and start to quake and have deer in headlights kind of look. And I remember one occasion in particular when I had my husband's celebration of life. And I was a wreck. I was doing the eulogy. And so all of a sudden, Clint's on the front row, and he does this. He goes, as only Reid could exaggerate. I mean, Clint could read it, just exaggerate and make it work, and he made me laugh. And it made me start, and I got through it because of Clint. So I'm trying to channel Clint right now and say, honey, I'm trying to breathe. I have two parts of what I want to say today. The first part is, it's going to be a brief history of Clint and Reid. But I want to thank Gary, first of all, for those wonderful tribute you gave to Reid and Clint. They would have been so honored by your words and honored that you allowed this service to take place here in the Brown Auditorium. Reid and Clint thought of this place as a second home in many, many ways. They were comfortable here for years, and they participated in so many of the patron groups and the committees and everything that, yes, this is their second home, so thank you. You're going to have to bear with me. If I get through this, it's going to be a miracle. Here we go. There are other people I'd love to thank on the development staff that made this possible today. Amy Purvis started this with Reid. It was after Clint had died in 21, and Reid wanted to have a memorial service here for Clint. Well, of course, that didn't happen. Reid became ill that following August, and so all of it was postponed indefinitely. And so here we are celebrating the two of them. Amy Purvis, Katie Netherton, who has been fabulous to this whole thing. She's event specialist. Ashley Powell, who is the curatorial officer. She worked with the patron groups and everything and notifying them of this event today. And the audiovisual team, Tish Stringer and Kirsten Otis. I also want to thank Heather Brand, who is Director of Publications, and her staff for the program design and helping me with that. It took another big load off my plate. It was lovely. Thank you so much. You all have made this event happen today, and thank you. Gary talked about Clint's deep friendships with many of the museum's curators. Malcolm Daniel, Lisa Volpe, Dina Woodall, Allison Green, Cindy Strauss, and Christine Gervais are curators who Clint worked closely with on committees and patron groups, and he also felt a special abiding kinship with these people. As I mentioned, it's unusual to have a memorial service for two people at one time. Reid's cancer was discovered in August, of course, and that's when we decided not to do anything at that time and postponed it till much later now. We have Reid's family here today, and I would love to introduce them. In fact, Don, his nephew, and Janice, his niece, are going to speak after I finish my part here today. But his sister, Denise Sanders, is here from Plainview, Texas. Thank you, Denise. Here she is. Janine Quisenberry, here, and her husband, Monty, from Lubbock. His nephew, Don Sanders, there, and wife, Jennifer, and their daughters, Darby and Logan, and their son, Curtis, all from Sealy, Texas. I don't think it's particularly corny. Some of you might think it is, but I loved putting these Hawaiian shirts out on the thing here. It's in remembrance of them. They all wore them, you know that. They loved them. They wore them everywhere. And I want to thank Ian Glennie for giving them a great moment in their lives. He collected vintage Hawaiian shirts and gifted them to Clint and Reid. And you would have thought that Ian had given them the world. My God, they were ecstatic about it. And here's Emily Todd, who was so sweet. We gathered all of the Hawaiian shirts from the condo, and Emily got them cleaned for me. Oh, God. Yes, that was kind of like one of the best presents anybody's given them. And they reminded me that every time I gave them a paltry little gift at Christmas or something that said, you know, it's not a Hawaiian shirt, Moody. It's the way it is. I'm going to give a brief history of their chronology. And then the people that will speak afterwards kind of fill in the spaces and the gaps. And then later on, I'm going to tell some personal stories that well, hopefully they're going to be funny. Clint was born June the 4th, 1941 in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and was raised in Shelton, Washington. After graduating, this is my script, guys. After graduating from the University of Washington in Seattle, he lived in San Francisco, then Oxford, Ohio, and finally settled in Houston in 1970. By the way, he was a cheerleader in high school. And somewhere I saw a picture of Clint in his cheerleading uniform and jumping up and down, and I couldn't find it to save my life. I wanted to put it up there on the screen for everybody to see. Wouldn't that be grand? It really would. Oh, when he got here in 1970, then in 1973, Tibor Denage Gallery opened, and Clint was hired as the assistant director. He was the constant through name changes. Gallery, it was called Watson Denage Gallery, then Watson Gallery, and then there were ownership changes, 3 of them. It finally closed in 1989. Reid was born May 20th, 1951 in Olney, Texas, and grew up in Woodson. He attended Lubbock Christian College and Texas Tech, graduating in 1979. In 1980, he was a football player. And there is a picture of him with a football kneeling down, again, someplace that I couldn't find. And I wanted to show that one also. A cheerleader and a football player. Think it. There we are. I love those boys. They were something else. In 1980, Reid moved to Houston and began working at Baja Sam's. And this is where Clint and Reid's story really does begin. Clint went to Baja Sam's all the time, and Reid noticed him. And whenever he saw Clint coming in, he would fix Clint's favorite drink and have it waiting for him. Well, this was kind of the great flirtation. And they started dating, and then they remained together for the rest of their lives. Isn't that just wonderfully romantic? I thought it was pretty grand, yeah. In the early years, they liked to travel, and probably a lot of y'all don't know this. They went to Europe, Alaska, New York. They traveled all over the United States. They really reveled in it. Whenever they could get time off, they did. Clint was becoming more involved in the arts, and Reid continued working. After Watson Gallery closed in 1989, their lives shifted. Clint began a new career as curator, and sometimes director, actually. When they would change directors, he would be the temporary director. He didn't like it, but he did. The Galveston Art Center. This new job was pivotal in new directions for both of them. It was a challenging job for Clint because he was commuting from Houston to Galveston all the time. And he was traveling, too. He would take the truck to pick up shows all over the place, deliver them back, so he was gone a lot. He was looking at work. I think he curated some of the best Texas art shows I certainly have ever seen, and probably everybody here. He introduced more people, put more artists on resumes than I've ever known of. It was pretty amazing. He clearly loved his job, and he truly excelled at it. In 2008, Hurricane Ike hit the Texas coast in Galveston. The Galveston Art Center was damaged terribly, as you all remember. And after a while, a temporary space was opened, and they used it for shows, while the Historic Art Center was being renovated. The building was reopened in 2015. In the meantime, Reid had gone through life-changing events and embraced his sobriety on May 23rd, 2013. It's pivotal in his life. It was one of the 2 most important events in Reid's life, and the other was he and Clint marrying after the Supreme Court deemed it legal. So, both of their lives changed quickly at this time. We all have hard times and sweet times in our lives. Clint had a heart valve replacement in May 2014. He was extremely ill for a long time during this period. Reid was sober, and he was at the hospital every single day by his side. He was his advocate. And I am firmly convinced that if Reid had not been there, he kept Clint tethered to this earth. I don't think Clint would have survived that at all. Clint eventually went through rehab and was released Christmas Eve 2014. He was there that long. Needless to say that we all celebrated that Christmas, for it was indeed very memorable on so many levels for us. 2015, the Supreme Court made same-sex marriage legal. And October 25th, 2015, Clint and Reid were married at Moody Gallery. You've seen the pictures up there, weren't they glorious? It was an exhibition of Gale-stack paintings, and what I loved is Clint and Reid both pretended they were in Chartres Cathedral because of all the cobalt blue and the stained glass. That's true. Clint said, "We're in Chartres." Can't you see him do that? And, of course, they wore their Hawaiian shirts, and the music, which you may have not heard very clearly, but there's a Hawaiian singer that we played the music for, and it's a medley of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and it's a wonderful world. with the ukulele in the background, and that was the music we played for the wedding. And Dennis Robinson, who's right there and going to speak, married them that day. And Tucker and I had the privilege of walking the boys down the aisle. We did. It was wonderful. Clint had worked at the Galveston Arts Center for 25 years and retired in 2016. He curated a two-part exhibition for his final act with a full catalog. The exhibition was titled 25 a Celebration and 25 a Conclusion. It's June 4th through August 21st, 2016. The final grand tribute to Clint and Reid took place here at the Museum of Fine Arts. And Clint was experiencing health failure at the time, and Reid had health issues as well. As I hear the story, Malcolm Daniel and Dina Woodall wisely had a conversation about an exhibition of the works that Clint had contributed to the museum, and came up with the idea that perhaps an exhibition should be planned while Clint was still able to participate. And it happened. Thank you, Gary. It meant the world to Clint, and it meant the world to Reid. It was a final amazing tribute, and the timing was perfect because Clint was able to participate, and the exhibition was stunning. It was a series of prints, drawings, and photography curated by Dina Woodall and Lisa Volpe, and they installed these beautiful clouds of works that had similar imagery. It was a beautiful installation, and what a fine tribute to Clint. And to Reid, it meant the world to both of them, so thank you for all of that. The last years were quite difficult for Clint and Reid health-wise. Strangely, when each had their bout with cancer, the other was healthy enough to take care of the other. Clint died of leukemia on February 4th, 2021, and Reid was diagnosed with throat cancer in August of 21 and died September the 4th, 22. Brief period, but after Reid embraced sobriety, he loved celebrating in Clint's art world. He enjoyed the exhibitions, the patron groups, the openings. His whole life changed, and Clint's did as well. Strangely enough, one thing a lot of y'all may not know is they all loved going to plays, symphony, and watching classic black and white movies. They were both avid readers. They both had very inquisitive minds and intellectual curiosity. Even though the last few years were very hard, they both had a tenderness about them, were quite pragmatic, and extremely courageous. All of our lives are better for having Clint and Reid in them. All of our lives are. And now, I'm going to turn it over to Don and Janice, the nephew and the niece.
So I'm Janine Quisenberry, and I was Reid's niece, and this is my brother Don. It's going to be tough to get through this. Can you hear me? Okay, because when I start ugly crying, y'all are really going to want to know this. So today I'm going to confine my remarks to the Book of Snark, because I found this in their apartment as we were cleaning it out today. And whoever gave this to them, y'all really didn't need to, because they already had plenty of it. So,
They didn't write it.
Yeah, they might have written it. I don't know. I have a script too. I took Betty's lead. I want to first thank you all for being here. I know that I speak for my entire family when I say it provides us great comfort and peace to know that they had all of you in their lives. I find it hard to find the words to sum up the lives of two accomplished men, especially in the short time that we have here. But our family's relatively small, so I'll try to tell you what they meant to us and the huge hole that they leave. Clint entered our lives when he entered Reid's life. And he became our uncle far sooner than the law allowed him to. Growing up as an only child, I think he had a lot of difficulty fitting in with our loud, boisterous games. He had a dramatic niece. He had a large nephew, and all this was very new to him. was a little uncomfortable with us, but he hung in there, and he didn't like our tight hugs when it came time to leave, but he was good with it. His patience was tested in many, many ways over the years. At times, I thought his eyes were permanently rolled back in his head. But dependably, he was there for the really important things like weddings, funerals, celebrations, those kinds of things. He was irreverently wicked, very funny. He grew to tease me about my cooking ability or lack thereof, and my refusal to brush my hair, which I still don't do. Sorry, Clint. He was thoughtful, and he picked me up many souvenirs during travels. He remembered our favorite colors. He knew our birthstones. He encouraged my love for the arts, and when I bought my first important work, or what I considered my first important work, I called him, and we discussed the artist's catalog, the work's purpose. He gave me advice about framing. Then later, when I saw that piece framed, or companion pieces framed, they were framed and matted exactly how he said they should be. His taste in all things was impeccable. Once he visited, and I wanted to take him to the nicest dining place in town, but he said he had nothing to wear, but I insisted. So he pulled out a starched shirt and jacket and matching socks and dress shoes that were finely polished, and he instantly became the best dressed person in our party. On my wedding day, my husband can remember this, I picked him to keep me on time. And at some point in the day, I must have been getting a little difficult because he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "We've got to go. You've got to pull it together, put on lipstick, and let's go." He said, "But not that pink, because that kind of washes you out." So I'm not wearing the pink, by the way, not wearing the pink. So we loved him best because he loved Reid, and he was his rock. Reid was my mother's brother, my mother's baby brother, just like this is my baby brother. He was my favorite uncle. I was born when Reid was in high school, and he was in college when my brother was born. He was in college for 10 years. He was on the decade plan. Secretly. Well, yeah, he was indoctrinated two times. I don't think he wanted to graduate, but he eventually did. He lived in Lubbock, 45 miles away from where we grew up in Plainview. When I was young, my parents would allow me to ride with him to see my grandparents on holidays like Christmas and Easter, and then on spring break. And those 4-hour trips, often at night, were some of my fondest memories. We'd start out singing together, usually hymns and carols, songs a 6-year-old would know. And we'd make up outrageous stories to tell one another until I'd fall asleep in the car, waking up the next morning in my grandmother's house to the smell of breakfast cooking. Breakfast was his favorite meal, though he seldom got up and around and ready soon enough to get out and get there before it was brunch. Reid never let an occasion pass by unnoticed. He remembered birthdays and anniversaries. He loved to celebrate. He was a thoughtful gift giver. I think that was his love language. He loved silly greeting cards, and he sent me hundreds over the years. We shared a love of college sports. His telephone calls were usually prompted by a big win or big loss, a coaching change, some scandal that we needed to dissect. He stayed in touch with people, and he loved to gossip. He was great at giving advice even when you didn't need it, and he was always there when we needed him. My brother and I could do no wrong in his eyes until it came time for us to choose where to go to school. We both chose Texas A&M over his beloved Texas Tech. Oh, his visits were always a treat because he was up for anything, from when I was going to the arcade as a teenager to camping with us in Goliad. And don't worry, he didn't have to be in a tent. We actually had an RV where his biggest problem was where to put all his hair and skin products, a little tiny bathroom. So we were sitting under the stars drinking mocktails because it was after that time of sobriety that he talked about what he wanted for Clint, the kind of memorial, and he gave me a lot of things that he wanted and things that he didn't. I think this was after Reid knew that his cancer had returned, and he was preparing me for his death when it happened. Reid loved life into his very last days. He was preparing for the future, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful lesson for all of us. And it's very powerful to lose two people who loved you unconditionally, who worked for the best for you in everything. People who remembered your history, saw your maturity, who cried tears of joy and grief with you, and who would stand with you through anything, prop you up when you needed it. When someone who helped you through a struggle, encouraged you when you needed a friend, or loved you without reserve is gone, they can't be replaced. And when someone who knew you from your youth, like your real youth, is gone, then your youth is gone. All of a sudden, you're old, mature. Well, maybe him, not me. Can't you just hear Reid right now saying, "Oh my gosh," and like Clint rolling his eyes and shaking his head? Instead of grieving, Reid and Clint would have wanted us to continue their kindnesses and become the kind of person they were to us. Not to cry, but to think back on great memories and to go on with a purpose. Finally, knowing how much I love poetry, I had to promise my Uncle Reid that I would not read W.H. Auden's Funeral Blues. He would not want people to stop all the clocks. He would not want to cut off the telephone. He was more of a Dylan Thomas kind of guy, do not go gentle into the good night, rave against old age should burn and rave, rage against the dying of the light. Can't you just see him rage against the dying of the light? So instead, I'll share my favorite Bible passage from the book of Ecclesiastes. And you've all heard it. To everything there is a season and a time and a purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to rend and a time to sow. A time to be silent and a time to speak. Solomon then added, God has made everything beautiful in its time. He has set eternity on the human heart. Isn't that beautiful? Thank you all for building us up and for your embrace here today. We wish that your time to weep and mourn is over and your time to dance and laugh has arrived. Keep the joy, cast away the sadness. May you see beauty all around you and carry the love in this room in the eternity of your heart. Because that's what Reid and Clint would have wanted. Thank you.
So I'll be the first one winging it up here because that's just the way I go. First off, as my sister said, I'd like to thank you all for being here. It is so wonderful to see so many people who cared about our uncles so deeply to be here. A special thanks to Miss Betty. As Reid opened the door and walked out of our life, Miss Betty came charging in and saved the day, actually. I just wanted to share a few stories about who they were because as I know them, they'd always been a package deal. Because I was too young to remember Reid when he was single. It was always Reid and Clint. They were always my uncles and always have been, always will be. And I remember that very vividly. Uncle Reid called me, and this was a very important time because he said, Don, Clint and I are going to get married. And this was big for me because we'd never spoken about that part of his life. I don't know why. It's not for me to push. But I said to him, well, it's about damn time he made an honest man out of you. And he asked me if I would stand with him at the wedding and the wedding party. I said, of course, it'd be my honor. And it truly was an honor to be a part of that, for him to invite me into that part of his life. One funny story, and then I'll be on my way. Because this is a celebration of life, and I think funny stories are an important part of that. When my wife and I got married, they kind of teamed up with one of my bridesmaids there at the reception, and just hung out. And we had what they call an anniversary dance, where you and your wife get out there, and everybody who's married gets out there with you, and they say, okay, if you've been married a day or less, get off the floor. And so my wife and I got to leave, and they go 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And Reid and Clint were standing off to the side with the bridesmaids, and Reid leaned into Clint and he says, how fast do you think we could clear this dance floor if we got out there? And I wish they would have, because I love the mischievous side of those two. I'll always carry parts of them with me. I've taken some of these shirts home with me because they were fine dressers. The Hawaiian shirts are beautiful. I've seen some of the ones that I now have hanging in my closet in this. This tie, you may have noticed it, probably not, but Clint was wearing it in one of his photos. I went through those ties and took some that spoke to me as well, because I always want to have a part of them. I've got pieces now hanging in my house that will help remind me of them, and I'll always be thankful for the time that I had with them. Thank you.
I joined the staff of the Museum of Fine Arts in 1976 as the adjunct curator of photography. Clint and I met 2 years later at the Contemporary Arts Museum benefit. He showed me a photograph in the auction and asked if he should purchase it. The photographer was not known to either of us. What was my opinion? Instead, I quoted him John Sarkovsky, purchase for the front of the picture, not the back. Thus began, and then I added, if you'd like the photograph, you want to live with it, and you can afford it, buy it. Thus began a 43-year friendship, rich with travel, laughter, collaborations, accessions, and public service. We were among the founders of various Houston nonprofit organizations, particularly the Houston Center for Photography, and we served together on many boards. If you sit on a board with Clint, don't sit next to you because he will be in your ear. You're trying to hear what the other people are saying, and there's this commentary, often very funny. I had to separate, in my subcommittee meeting, I had to separate Clint and Jim Maloney and Joan Morgenstone, because, especially when poor Ann was chair, and she would go, Ann, and they would go, second, first, second, done. Had to separate them. Our shared core value was to support artists early in their careers. Clint was often the first person to buy a photographer's work, so was I. Individually or together, we acquired hundreds of images that became the first of a photographer's work to enter a museum collection. Frequently, when I looked at artists' resumes, Clint was the first to exhibit their art and to produce a catalog. Sometimes Clint would buy a print for an MFA and one for himself by the same photographer, and then that print would later be given to a different museum, preferably in Texas or his home state of Washington. At a glass sale auction, someone asked Clint if he'd been to every museum in Texas. A little surprised by the question, he said, I think so, because he was just thinking maybe I missed one. He would plot trips around the state where shows were opening. It was not uncommon for him to visit 2 or 3 different museums in different Texas cities and then drive home for the night. I-10, I-45, I-69 were his pathways. When multiple Houston galleries or museums opened exhibitions in one weekend, he attended almost all, even when they were on different sides of the city. He went to every PhotoFest show during the run of the festival, which was as many as 50 shows in 8 weeks. PhotoFest was also an important opportunity for him to purchase photographs or call certain works to my attention or now to Malcolm and Lisa's. Clint's memory for what he purchased, where, and from whom was just damn near photographic. Another generous trait was to donate prints in honor of someone, honoring both the photographer and the honoree. Those honors ranged widely. His circle of friends was diverse and grew to be international through his membership in Oracle, an international gathering of photo curators around the world. Once I was in a meeting with him when two curators from major museums complained that their development office was inadequate, that the press personnel weren't supporting their projects, that publication offices didn't promote their books. Like Clint, many of the other members in the room were employed with much smaller nonprofit organizations with substantially less money. I'm going to try to do this Clint way. So Clint, in his defense, went, "When I need to raise money, I do it myself. And when I need to pick up and deliver art, I do it myself. And when I need to organize and hang an exhibition, I do it myself. And when I need to publicize the show, I do it myself." By this time, everybody in the room was laughing, even some of those curators who had initiated the conversation. But Clint's point had been made. Reid was with us for dinners and events. Oh, they were smart dressers. And when they wanted to be, one of my favorite photographs is that one of them dancing. Reid had a sharp eye for good style. I am far from being a fashionista. Clint would sometimes criticize my clothing choices as lacking flair. So, for Christmas or birthdays, there were always beautiful scarves and jewelry to sort of spiff me up a bit. I once told Reid that I loved the pair of earrings I had just received, and he could borrow them. They weren't virgin, darling. I still wear them. Once in Paris, an acquaintance recognized me in a sidewalk cafe, sitting with Reid and Clint. She sat with us for a while, and when she left, they both had questions. Of course they did. I said I knew her parents were on art museums in Los Angeles, and I thought that they were wealthy. Reid had a disgusted look. Her shoes are Manolo Blahnik. The purse and belt are Chanel, and the jacket at Dolce & Gabbana, looking at me with perfect disgust. I told you, it wasn't my field. Both Clint and Reid were good conversationalists and selective about food. They carefully read travel guides in advance and marked promising stops. Our second trip to Europe together was personal and not professional. It started as a graduation present for my nephew, Arthur. Clint and Reid decided to join us. Then my brother made it 5. Traveling from Paris into southwest France, into the mountain caves of the Cathars, a religious sect about whom Pope Innocent III declared a crusade in 1209. If any of you have ever been to Carcassonne, you may know this story. It's one of the living gated towns that still exists. But when they went after the Cathars and that they said to the Pope they weren't sure when they raided who they should kill, and the Pope said, "Kill them all and God will sort it out." Clint and Reid demurred climbing into the caves and instead located nearby Roman aqueducts. Then we were all reunited in Marseille. Part of my nephew's education was watching Reid, Clint, and my brother analyze the menus and argue over wine lists. Reid was also an avid reader. As Betty noted, we were all subscribers at Imprint. But his selections were broader than contemporary writing. The last book that he passed on to me was Anna Karenina, which he had read, and I still have sitting on the back of the toilet. When we mentioned that Clint was sick for so long, he was in intensive care for months and months, and eventually they moved him into this depressing hospital, which I was only told later by another doctor that only 10% of the people ever leave that hospital. And but I was single at that time and worked late at the museum, and so I would always leave the museum and then go up and spend time with Reid, just because Clint was there, but Clint was with a trach and unconscious. And then suddenly, one night, Clint woke up and looked around, and he looked at the room, and he put his finger in his trach, and he said, "Ugly." And Reid started doing a football thing going, "The curator's back! The curator's back!" Oh, God, how I miss him. The highest honor was joining Betty and some of Reid's family and as participants in the wedding for Clint and Reid. Their invitation read, "Clint Willour and Reid Mitchell and the Supreme Court of the United States invite you to this wedding." I have to say, when they said "I do," there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Thank you.
Of those speaking today, I knew Clint and Reid the least amount of time. Reid came into my life in May of 2013 when he, like I had many years earlier, decided he needed to stop drinking. As Reid and I got to know each other, he mentioned his partner Clint, and I asked, "You're not the Clint and Reid from Sunday nights at the Exile back in the early 80s, are you?" And he responded in his deadpan manner, "Every Sunday night." I hope I'm the only person that recognized little Bobby, the drag queen, in those photos there, but if someone else remembers, we're lucky to still be here. I remember them both because they look considerably more distinguished than the average patron at the bar. Rather quickly, after reconnecting, Reid asked me if I would be his 12-step sponsor. Between laughing about things we had seen and done in the haze of the early 80s and seriously discussing our lives since, Reid became like a brother to me. The Reid Mitchell I and others knew as a sober man, and there's many of us here today, was someone dedicated to service to others. He made coffee daily for our group, was the first to enter the room, so he was there to greet everyone who entered. He went on to sponsor other men, one of who's here today. When he led meetings or shared, he could convey his thoughts in few words, and usually with some of that small Texas West humor of his. I felt Reid was the heart of our group. He knew everyone's name, and several people have told me how much his remembering and genuinely caring about them meant to them and helped them in their early days. In our relationship, Reid and I shared many laughs and a healthy dose of gossip, but we also shared our struggles. When Clint had his serious illness and was hospitalized, I was daily humbled at Reid's courage when, for a period of a few months, it seemed he would lose Clint. Only once during that long period of uncertainty did Reid call me and say, "I'm scared." He wanted to bear his burdens without bothering others. I was so moved that I'll never forget where I was when he called, because it was an honor to be a friend of someone with so much courage, faith, and concern for others, even during his most difficult days. Through Reid, I became friends with Clint also. When Reid asked if I would officiate their wedding, we scheduled a lunch to discuss details with Clint. One part of me felt this was just a formality to get to know Clint better, but another part felt under intense scrutiny, and not from Reid. Of course, I grew to love Clint also, but was always happy to have Reid as my protector. As much as I'm saddened by the fact that Reid did not have more years of his new life, I'm so grateful to have been a part of all of them. In the year and a half after Clint's passing, Reid and I spent many afternoons at the movies and evenings at live music venues. No matter what obscure singer I wanted to see, Reid would familiarize himself with the artist and be genuinely enthusiastic about the evening. One of my favorite memories was earlier this year when we went out to Tomball. We made it back to hear someone I particularly liked. When we got out of the car, the lighted marquee had upcoming acts, and Reid and I read them together. And I commented, "Tracy Bird. I think he used to be a star, Reid." And immediately he responded, "We all were, honey. We all were." Having Reid in my life made me a better man. I will treasure my friendship with this thoughtful, gentle man for the rest of my journey.
Well, hi, there are a lot of people in this room today. Betty, maybe I should have done this by Zoom, and my notes are not nearly as nice as yours. My name is Randy Ormes. I have been friends with Reid and Clint for almost 40 years. It feels like 100, but I have known them for a very long time, and we have shared many, many things publicly and privately because we have talked and talked. I moved away from Houston in 1996, but have talked to Reid and often Clint, sometimes daily, and certainly at least every week. And when I sat down to think about what I wanted to say today, I really struggled to find the words. I wanted to be able to say the right things. I wanted to be able to pay tribute to these two extraordinary guys. And I wanted to be able to explain to everybody here how I feel and what they meant to me. Well, there probably aren't the perfect words, and if there are, I don't have them today. But I could tell you stories about them. I could tell you a story about the time Reid smashed an entire Boston cream pie in my face in the middle of a crowded restaurant, or the many, many times that Reid and I spent on Galveston Beach in June, July, August, with a boombox blasting Christmas carols or opera music, because he was a fan of opera. And people would walk by us on the beach, and they'd look, and they'd go, weirdos, you know, they would just... Or I could talk to you a little bit about Clint, who, as those of us who knew him, understand that he liked to wear his staunch and his stalwart as a badge of honor, trying to climb out the backseat window of my car to chase down the Pittsburgh Steelers team bus after an NFL game one time. And I still don't know why. There are thousands of stories, and I will spare you the stories today, but if anybody wants to hear the really dirty details, I'm happy to share on a private basis. But there are two things that I wanted to do today. The first thing is actually a challenge for everyone here today. Let's call it the Mitchell-Willour TikTok challenge. so to speak. You don't have to dump a bucket of ice over your head. You don't have to steal a car. You won't have to drink any hand sanitizer. But you can, and we all can, as we are creating our own mosaics to leave our own legacy, try and carry on their legacy. And it's really going to be very simple to do that. Be kind as often as you can. Be a little bitchy when you need to be, because that's going to be part of it too. Let's see what I've written down here. And be caring to those around you. Fight for the things you stand for and for the ones you love. Be a leader. Be a champion. Cheer for the underdog. Do what you can to make an impact. Wear a Hawaiian shirt. And Betty, if these disappear, check my pockets. Those are all characteristics that I saw in Reid and Clint every single day. And they're things that made me love them over the years and care about them, as I'm sure everyone else here feels the same way. The second thing that I want to do, and as some of the family members have mentioned, I want to thank everybody who's here today, who came to pay tribute and to honor these guys. It has been my honor to know them and meet some of the other folks that I have not previously met here today, and to hear stories. And I want to hear stories. So if anybody's willing to share. But I think everybody in this room helped to shape the men that they became and the men that they are today, to all of us. And so I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for recognizing the quality of their character and the charity in their souls. I want to thank you for sharing your experiences and your memories with Clint and Reid. And I want to thank you for mourning their passing and celebrating their lives. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jon Evans, Chief of the Library and the Archives here at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. It's really a privilege to be here today to honor our friends Clint and Reid. This morning, I got a text from my daughter Lillian, who knew Reid and Clint quite well, having worked and spent some time over at the Moody Gallery with that crew. And she said to me, "What's the dress code for today?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to be semi-formal, but you know, it's for Clint and Reid, so you might want to go kind of casual." And she said, "Got it. Hawaiian shirt, Rockports, windbreaker." And I said, she nailed it. I'm so thrilled that she got a chance to get to know these such beautiful men, to know them, to love them in the same way that I came to know and love them. It was a real privilege. I had the good fortune to meet Clint in the mid to late 90s when I was working right here in the Hirsch Library, which was upstairs up until not too long ago, when Clint would patronize the library. And in the early 2000s, he made a decision that he was going to start donating some of his books to the library. And we thought, great. Little did we know exactly what that meant. That would be thousands of books later. But Clint was the ideal donor. He would send us a list of 5 or 6 pages, typed out, of 50 or 60 items, and let us choose exactly what we wanted. So those of you thinking about making donations, take note. That's the way to do it. So we would cherry pick the things that we'd want, and a week or two later, Clint would show up at our doorstep, and we would pour through the books, and he would tell me why each one was important or significant for him. He would talk about, well, this one was inscribed, and this one has a drawing on the inside, this one's a limited edition, this one has a work of art that's going to come to the Museum of Fine Arts Houston because I'm going to give it to you. This one already has a work of art by the museum, and so forth, and that would carry on that way. We would have really deep conversations about the meaning of each of these, but it wasn't just about that these books were carriers of information. These were items and objects that were personal carriers of history, and the two of us really bonded over that, and that forged a decades-long friendship between the two of us. And so it went for 2 decades. We did that not only here at the museum, but in the later years when it was hard for Clint to get to the museum, we'd do that over at the Betty Moody Gallery or out of the back of his little red car hunched over his trunk. As Gary Tinterow noted earlier, that would ultimately amount to 2,500 volumes that would come to the library here at the museum. He was one of our most significant patrons. That would also come with a huge amount of ephemera. All the newspaper clippings, gallery notices, curriculum vitae, artist statements that have so enriched our collections here and really are the building blocks and the foundations for great research. I learned so much from him about local art history. It was just incredible. And we would go to shows together here around town, and it was just a privilege to see things through his eyes. He was incredibly generous with his knowledge, not only with me, but to many, many of my colleagues here. As has been noted, he was on 5 subcommittees here. He was part of 6 affinity groups. So I was always loved to go to a meeting with Clint because he always had a thoughtful question, a very illuminating comment. But I particularly like to go to subcommittee meetings where Clint was going to be participating, because at those meetings, decisions get made about which gifts or which purchases are going to be acquired by the institution. And invariably, at any meeting, Clint would then have something to say that everyone would stop and listen to, because he would say, yeah, well, I actually sold that work of art, or I had actually exhibited that work here, or it had been seen over there, and then went to this person's house, and on and on. And it was an incredible education for the committee members that were there, as well as the staff who were really learning about the provenance and the history of those works of art. He was respected not only for his knowledge about the arts in the Houston area, but also what I would say is for his common decency. I recall that after he was hospitalized, he immediately wanted to come back here to the museum, probably sooner than he really should have, because he was barely teetering in here. Reid would come and drop him off at what we call the Montrose loading dock. He would come up the ramp and putter his way across the lobby of Cullinan Hall and make his way to the library. He would have on his walker the little green tennis balls on the bottom, and he hated that. He thought it was so embarrassing. So as soon as he could, he ditched that. And he did so by somehow sweet-talking one of our security guards to give him their personal rolling office chair that he then would take all the way across the lobby. So I don't know that Mies van der Rohe ever envisioned that any person would duck walk their way across the lobby with a rolling chair in his beautiful international style pavilion, but I don't think he counted on Clinton T. Willour. I mention this as I think it's classic Clint. Clint had a way of pushing the boundaries, of having fun, but also our guards don't normally give furniture to any patron. And that's because Clint was really a member of the team. He really was one of us. And that was because Clint showed a deep, deep respect for every person that worked here. He talked to every guard. He knew their names. He talked to every visitor services staff member. He knew the curatorial assistants. He engaged with everyone all the way up to the director and treated them the same way. No one else was beneath him. I also want to say something about his generosity of spirit. When my eldest daughter, Lillian, who I mentioned earlier, was at HSPVA, the High School for the Performing and Visual Arts here in town, my wife Joyce and I were involved with the art department there, and we were asked to help to coordinate the senior art exhibition over at the Young Center. And we asked Clint if he would serve as a juror, which he unhesitatingly did. And when I introduced him at this event, I said that he was the face that launched 1,000 careers. And I don't think that many of the students really knew the allusion to Helen of Troy in that statement, but I looked over at Clint and I knew that he loved being compared to Helen of Troy. And while there's some hyperbole in the statement about launching 1,000 careers, there is no doubt that Clinton T. Willour had an incredible impact on this community with the number of exhibitions that he coordinated 469 different exhibitions at the Galveston Art Center alone. So one of the things I'll never forget, I said, how are you going to make decisions about the various choices for the exhibition? And he said, well, in a show like this where you have young artists and it's not blind reviewed, I always make a point of choosing at least one work from every single artist. And I thought that said so much about Clint. He knew the impact that would have on a young artist. He knew what that would mean to them. In some cases, he was seeing something in them before others saw it or before they may have even seen it in themselves. So while the donations that Clint has made to our institution and to many others are an important part of his legacy, I think the biggest part is that he was a mentor, he was a champion to artists, he was a confidant, and he was a friend. Thank you.
All of you were stunning. I think everybody filled different parts of Clint and Reid's lives and for us. Thank you all so much for all the words you've said. It's quite an impact. Thank you, Jon. In conclusion, I'm going to share some stories. And some of them are pretty silly. They both had a great sense of humor, as you know. And I think they both would like a little levity sometimes. They certainly, I know Clint and Reid both would feel that way. I met Clint in 1973 and Reid in 1981. And little did I know at that time that these two men would become such dear friends, like brothers, and become so important to me in my life. Clint and I began going to events later together in the late 70s, both without spouses at the time. And as Clint said, he needed a girl date, and he said I needed a walker. Yeah, y'all know that term, don't you? Mm-hmm. We had a ball. We had so much fun. We loved looking at art together, and we both loved to dance. Clint was a great dancer. Do y'all remember that? Yeah, he was fabulous. So we had a great time. And in 1981, Clint and I both met our true loves. I met Bill Steffi and married him, and he met Reid and eventually married Reid. So that started different lives. Bill and Reid were both quite happy to let Clint and I go to art openings together and travel together. Needless to say, they both liked being off the hook for that. So for years, Clint and I went all over the United States. We went to art shows, art fairs. We curated shows together. We had a marvelous time together. There's so many great memories. There are a lot of silly ones. So maybe I'll share a few of the silly ones. I'll embarrass a few people like Lee and Layla over here. Yeah, Lee Steffi, my daughter, and also worked together for all of our lives and everything. And my granddaughter Layla is here. Adon is in college. He is not here. But they grew up with Uncle Reid and with Uncle Clint. Saw them during the holidays and saw them at the gallery. They were a regular fixture all the time. Clint and Reid also were foodies. At least they considered themselves foodies. And at each holiday, Christmas or Thanksgiving, Clint had these great, what he called garlic mashed potatoes that he made. And I remember for a long time he said, oh, I worked so hard on these. I baked the potatoes, I mashed them, I mashed up the garlics, I did all this stuff. Well, one time Reid, who had had a few drinks at that time, looked at Reid. He said, oh, come on, Clint. He said, you know, those are instant potatoes. And that is an instant little kind of thing he throws into it with garlics and onions. And Clint had a fit. He was absolutely irate. They fussed the rest of the time there. And Reid was always responsible for making the gravy. And during his days of sobriety, the gravy was always great. But before that, it was kind of hit and miss. And we always had like this instant gravy mix that I kept in the pantry just in case. And I actually used it a few times. It's pretty bad, but at least it was something to use. And then every Christmas, the boys made that almond roca. For those of you that were lucky enough to get their almond roca at Christmas, that was Clint's mother's recipe. Clint learned how to make it, and so did Reid. So, yeah, that was pretty special. We always look forward to that. Clint called us Will and Grace from the start. Do y'all know anybody here doesn't know who Will and Grace was? Well, probably if you ask an older person, they'll tell you who it is. But he was always, I remember Ann talking about the clothes thing. They were fashion police. They truly were. And they were always on me about wearing gray and black and no color and being drab. So one evening, Reid and Clint and I were going out. And here we are. I have turquoise on, though. Oh, that's from Clint and Reid. Anyway, I had this kind of flowery top on that had flowers on it. It's not like me at all, but I did it because they had been on my case a lot lately and everything. And I came out in there, and Clint looked at me, and he said, "Are you wearing that, Moody?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You look like a clown, Grace. All you need is a red nose." So I looked over at Reid, and Reid at that point kind of rolled his eyes back and said, "Oh, Clint." With that, we went back to my closet. They picked out a gray jacket, put it on, we left. That was it. But I'll never forget that saying, "You look like a clown, Grace." I've remembered that to this day. And I did. So there we are. Then there are Clint's boxes. Do y'all remember his boxes he used for filing? For those of you that, some people will laugh about it. I'm seeing a few right now. They kind of trailed behind him and accumulated wherever he went. 3 offices at the Galveston Arts Center were filled with them, and thank God the hurricane wiped out the first floor and got rid of those boxes. Or John would be dealing with even more boxes than he's dealing with right now. I know that. They were kind of like little time capsules. And what Clint would do every day, it started at Watson. I remember seeing him, all these boxes at Watson Gallery in the early years when I first knew him. I thought, what are these boxes about? And he would just take every day's things left over from whatever it was, and they just kind of filled up. One would fill up and he'd close it, then he'd start the next one. Well, I know that happened when they gave him temporary officing here at the Museum of Fine Arts, and never knew what happened to those boxes. Did they go to his house or someplace? I'm not sure where, or if they came to Moody Gallery. I remember after Clint decided to retire from the Galveston Arts Center, we set up a little desk and a computer in my office for him because he and Reid needed a place to go. They had to have an office and a computer. They had no computers at home, and so they had to do emails and things. So I remember the first box that appeared, and then there were others. And one day, I went into the storage room, which is next door, which had big shelves in it, and Clint had kind of off the hand said, "Can I have one shelf over there?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." Went over there. They were all filled. The whole storage room was filled with boxes. They were just everywhere. So that's when Lillian Evans got a phone call. And Lillian, bless her heart, worked there for a long time. I called her and said, "Please." And Clint loved Lillian. So she worked with Lillian. She was so kind with him. She'd go through every box and say, "Okay, what should we do with this, Clint?" You remember that, don't you? Well, you got rid of a lot of boxes. What John did not tell you today is I'm executive of the estate, so I've been undoing the condo, and it was filled to the brim with boxes of things, plus artwork galore and marvelous clothes and all sorts of things. So John very sweetly came over there one day, and I was just hoping he would do this. There were, 65, 68 boxes? I think they came from my place and from the museum, and no telling where else, Galveston Arts Center. But John has them, and there's no telling what type of marvelous books and ephemera that he's going to find in this. It's the history of Texas art, literally. He found that in the posters alone. Pretty amazing. So there we are. Most of you probably didn't know Reid as well as you knew Clint. But Reid was such a wonderfully complex person. He and I went to yoga with Ann Tucker at the Winsdale Link for a long time. Had a good time. Then they closed, of course, COVID started and everything. We went to Imprint together for a long time. Ann touched on that. He loved to read. He also loved all the performing arts, opera, Broadway, all of those things. And he loved classic black and white movies. One night we watched Voyager Now, and he could quote every long line from Betty Davis, just verbatim, the whole way through. Later on, one evening, we were at dinner at Davino's after an opening. And Edward Albee had been someone who frequented JR's, where Reid worked at the time, when he would be teaching here in the springtime at U of H in the creative writing program there. And Reid had read everything Albee ever wrote. He loved the plays. He had seen whatever movies were made, everything. He really knew it backwards and forwards. So I always looked forward to those visits. We were at Davino's one night after an opening at the gallery, and there were some young people there, and you know how those conversations kind of meander around all over the place. So Albee's name came up, and so Reid said, well, you know, they didn't know who Albee was. It was somebody who wasn't familiar to them. And he said, well, you've ever heard of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? And they had not. So all of a sudden, Reid becomes Virginia Woolf at the dinner table. And he's at this end, and all of a sudden his face changes, his hands change, and his voice goes up, and he does the major shrew bitch scene in Virginia Woolf right there at the restaurant. And everybody just stopped and watched him. It was amazing. Did the whole scene. And after it was over, he sat down, and he just looked at everybody. He said, now, that was Virginia Woolf. It was amazing, and that was it. You know, we all kind of clapped. He was pretty magnificent. Oh, I could go on about Reid. He was wonderful about those things. I just thought he was unbelievable. After Clint died, Lisa Barkley and I decided that Reid needed a laugh. I've always thought that laughter is really good for the soul and for grieving. So we decided that he needed to see all the episodes from Grace and Frankie. So once a week, Reid would come over, and Lisa and Reid and I would go to like Central Market and get dinner or any place to go, and we'd go back into my cave at the gallery and sit at we have some TV trays, and we'd sit there, eat our dinner, and watch Grace and Frankie for 2 or 3 episodes each time, and Reid loved it. It made him laugh. And that was a hard time, so you have to really think of things to get you through hard times. And Grace and Frankie got us through that for a long time. I thank you, Grace and Frankie. I just love both of those women who did that whole series. It was pretty grand. My last story is pretty meaningful to me. And the boys always loved to celebrate birthdays. They were important. We always celebrated each other's birthdays. And Clint and Reid both knew that my favorite bit of music is Rachmaninoff's theme from Paganini. It's just breathtaking. And the Houston Symphony was playing, and it was the major piece they were playing one night. And so Clint and Reid got tickets to take me to that night. And by this time, Clint was on a walker, so we had the best seats in the house. It was where they put all the people in walkers and wheelchairs. You have a big aisle in front, and we're just front center. It was magnificent. So we're sitting there, and music's sublime. There's nothing like live orchestra. Live music is just amazing. It just takes you some other place. So we're sitting there, and the theme from Paganini, the pianist starts, and it's just beautiful. So I'm sitting there, and I've got tears rolling down my face, and look over at Clint, and he's got tears rolling down his face. And then we look at Reid. Oh, Reid. He's got big tears rolling his face. His eyes are closed, and his hands are like this. And he's just going with it. And then all of a sudden, you hit this one soaring bit of music where it just goes up, and all of a sudden, Reid's just there with the conductor doing it. He is in the moment, 100%, totally uninhibited, just loving every minute of it. And Clint and I were pretty enjoying it, too. We were kind of in the moment, too. But while that was going on, I just thought to myself, here is 3 old gray hairs who've grown older together. We're loving this moment. We don't care what anybody thinks. We're just having a ball. We're loving being together. And, it was a great moment. I'll never forget that. That was the last birthday we celebrated. Here we go. I'll never get through this poem. I found a poem. I was looking for the proper ending for this day. And it had to be something that was very Clint and Reid. They were as emotional as they could be. They were very pragmatic, and they really didn't like all the gushy stuff. So I found this great poem by Mary Oliver, and I think they would have liked it. It's very short and very much to the point about friendship. It was written upon the death of one of her and her partner's great friends. It is titled it's for Don Shaw, who died. He was born in 1945 and died in 2014. says, "Where has this cold come from?" It comes from the death of your friend. Will I always, from now on, be this cold? No, it will diminish, but always it will be with you. What is the reason for it? Wasn't your friendship always as beautiful as a flame? Ah, they were. They're always there for me during the sweet and the hard times. They were extraordinary friends. And look at you, they touched all of our lives. You're all here to celebrate their lives. Think what they meant to all of us. I'll carry them in my heart for the remainder of my life. Thank you for being here.